Questions? Are there questions for Murph about this? Ask Bronson.
Just wondering, Murph, that amazing work that you're doing. Thank you. And in discussions with the group, what's the, I'm sure funding is, we'll just put funding aside as a big issue. What are some of the other issues or obstacles that you're addressing in these different committees? Is there some that are kind of universal to all of this work and some that are very specific to some of this work?
But I think outside of sort of dollars and cents, the funding structure of having some groups being able to be funded and served through legal aid and having some tools, that is why some of the subcommittees have formed around people who are undocumented, and then around people who are in prison or reentering. Like there's been some, like that's a structural issue, I think. And then the big structural, some of the, I think, issues are, I think the biggest one is civil criminal. Like there's very few people, like criminal debt, civil debt, like they all sort of driving while suspended. Like there's this huge split of people have to go here for this and there for this, and there's not sort of this justice system that actually works for people. So I think that having a justice system that actually works for people and that we can be successful within that system, whether it's an eviction hearing or a driver's license suspension, those courts were not built for the people that use them. And so I think that is sort of a theme throughout DISCO. And so we're trying to figure out through these subcommittees how we're complicit in that as legal aid providers. And we've been really thinking a lot about, with the help of Christiana, who is the equity person, like how do we think about those barriers? And I think we've had a great discussion about that. But I think that's probably the biggest barrier is having that kind of a system where we put people away in cages, and how do they access justice if they have a family law issue, or their family is getting evicted, or they're losing their child, and so they have representation on that, but then they're also getting evicted, and there's all these other things happening, and we have 5 different legal aid programs that serve them, and then we have 3 different, we have unified family court, and then we have eviction court, and then we have criminal court, and so it's just really challenging. And so thinking about up against that huge structure that's been set for, several centuries, how do we make change?
Yeah,
I hope that answers your question. That's a lot of what we try to talk about in DISCO. Sometimes we have to talk about the day-to-day, like how do we return from COVID? What challenges are people having? Another theme that we talk about regularly is the inequities of different programs. Some folks have benefits who are legal aid providers, some folks don't. And so that can be I know that folks have really done a lot to bring the salaries up and try to have parity, but there's still a lot of those issues out there. Yeah, just having discussions about those kinds of things. So, thanks.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Great. Any other questions for Murph? All right. Well, thank you to Murph and to DISCO for all that work that you are doing. Next on our agenda, we have liaison reports from the ATJ board members. Are there any reports people want to make from their committees?
Sorry, Terry, I can't access my notes right now. So I'm trying to find them. I can't access them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Other committee reports. All right. Then I see our invited guest, Justice Gordon MacLeod. Welcome. I don't yet see your co-editor, Professor Dana Rogratsky.
I don't see her either, but I see Kelly Ambergy Richardson my
Yes.
my right-hand person, I'm a lefty, so I'm going to call her my left-hand person, who's doing the PowerPoint and has great familiarity with the report. So our plan was that I would do an overview, and then Donna was going to do the portion with questions, comments, priorities to discuss with you guys. So
Well,
I'm comfortable starting a little before she hops on.
well, I think that's great. So we are very happy to have you present on this major new work, How Gender and Race Affect Justice Now. So
Kelly, does that sound okay with you? I think Donna's heard my intro. Donna could probably do my intro.
I believe she just joined the meeting, so.
Oh, great. Perfect.
And I will pull up your PowerPoint now.
Thank you. Well, while Kelly's pulling up the PowerPoint, thank you for inviting us. Sal said, I'd like to ask you to do us a favor and present. And it was like, oh my God, you're doing us a favor to allow us to help get the word about the report out. As you said, Donna Rogrodsky, Dr. Rogrodsky, professor at UW Law School, is my co-chair on this multi-year research venture. Kelly Ambergy Richardson really coordinated everything about the report, except what Sierra Ratakana, our project manager, was coordinating. So thank you to both of them for doing that. And, you know, it's funny to be like presenting to you guys. Sal is a liaison to gender and justice. He's pretty familiar with the report. One of our key recommendations, or one of our key umbrella areas that encompasses a lot of recommendations, is access to the courts. And undoubtedly your people have helped us with our research and with framing that. And you've got your AC members, my advisory committee members, some of whom are members of ATJ. I see Jim Bamberger on this call. Cesar was one. And I'm looking right at Esperanza, who I know I've presented to and talked with about this report before. So I'll make it a shorter overview. But this is the final report. Next slide, please. It's a 30-year, it was intended to be a 30-year look back from the 1989 Gender and Justice in the Courts report. This is the cover of that report. 30 years ago, our state legislature asked our state Supreme Court to lead a task force that was studying gender in the courts. And we did so. Next slide, please. And the 1989 report addressed these limited topic areas, which you can see are pretty much what you would consider gendered areas anyway. Rape, domestic violence, divorce, women in the profession. Next slide, please. Oh, this and the next one are hard to read, but it's because it's a table of contents of our current report, which includes the 1989 topics, but includes a ton of other topics. And basically our approach was, that's great that they looked at explicitly gendered areas in 1989. We now know that many areas, perhaps all areas of procedure and substantive law, can have a gendered impact, positive or negative. And we wanted to investigate everything to see how that worked out. So we scoped it down from everything under the sun to about 20 topics. We're sad to lose the other infinite number of topics, but on topics like incarceration, which were not touched in the prior report, it became clear that while we all know about the great increase in incarceration of men, particularly Black, Indigenous, and other men of color over the past 30 years, I didn't know that while that increase had been checked and was slowly going down after the last 10 years, there was an increase over that same period of time in the incarceration of women. But you didn't see it unless you broke it out by gender, the numbers out by gender and by race and ethnicity, because the impact is primarily on Black, Indigenous, and other women of color. And we found that same impact in all the other areas we studied. Juvenile justice, which is not included in the criminal section because it's nominally dubbed a civil matter. But every area that we studied, we found that unless you could break down the numbers by gender, and within that by race and ethnicity, you would overlook some of the impacts on women. Next slide, please. More topics that we looked into. Actually, go back one slide back, Kelly, if you don't mind. The access part is part one of this table of contents, and it's hard to read, but we looked at areas of financial barriers to accessing the courts. Gee, who do financial barriers primarily hit? People of lower income without means. Given that women, particularly women of color in that category, there's an increased impact on women. Communication and language, well, if you're looking for a protection order, that impacts women generally more than men. Access to jury service, you might not notice the impact on women unless you broke that down by race and ethnicity as well. Okay, let's see, 2 slides ahead, maybe, Kelly. What you might not know is that in addition to the research that we did in published data, we also did our own pilot projects, and we're really thrilled that we were able to do them, because what we found in researching other areas is that the data sometimes it just stunk. It stunk because you could get National Bureau of Prisons data broken down by race or broken down by ethnicity, but not broken down by both. They categorized ethnicity differently than the state categorizes ethnicity. For a blunt example, Latino, Latina in a lot of Washington data is ignored because the boxes are white, Black, Latino. So if you identify as both Black and Latino, well, choose one. And usually Black was chosen. Same with if you identify as white and Latino. So we were really glad that we were able to do our own pilot projects and get some of our own data. Domestic violence moral recognition therapy is a low-cost alternative to the domestic violence perpetrator treatment model, which is usually ordered by courts in criminal cases, but administered by a private provider who the defendant often ends up not being able to pay for and then is out of compliance, et cetera, et cetera. And we found that this lower cost model was very promising in terms of outcomes. Childcare programs. There were only 2 childcare programs existing in the state at or connected with courthouses for us to evaluate. Guess what? We found out that they really helped the people that they served, and the caregivers that they served were primarily women and women without the means to hire private caregivers. So they helped the people who knew about them. Only a handful of people knew about them. The incarceration data, basically, we were able to disaggregate by gender and somewhat by race and ethnicity, but not perfectly. But that's what allowed us to see that the rates of incarceration of women over the past 10 years were actually increasing, particularly for Black and Indigenous women. The workplace harassment survey was focused on the judicial branch. So us looking at our own house to see how we're doing in terms of the workplace. And it wasn't a gender harassment survey, it was an everything harassment survey. And we found that in the judicial branch, there were a lot of reports of harassment, and the majority of them were not on the basis of gender. The reported harassment on the basis of, Black and Indigenous women reported the most harassment, as did Black, Indigenous, and other people of color who are in the LGBTQ community. And finally, the pilot project on jury diversity. We took Minority and Justice Commission data that they had previously collected and broke it down by gender, and did find that it's hard for women with caregiving responsibilities and of lower means, guess who that is, to be able to access the courts for jury service. Next slide, please. So we ended up with 5 overall goals. This is the one that we were pulling our hair out about, because we were so annoyed that the data was so poor. And we, with the help of Whisker, Washington State Center for Court Research, and others, developed detailed recommendations about how to collect good data, how to report it, how to disaggregate, how to label it, et cetera, so that for research purposes, we could disaggregate it and get answers to some of our questions. The next goal, I think, is of particular interest to ATJ, improve access to the courts. Now, we're not telling you anything new in this area. And obviously, we want to partner with you. If it's an area that we can partner on by providing you with data that we found where you take the lead, great. If it's an area that we can partner on where you want us to take the lead or where you just want to partner, great. But we're in it with you, and Donna will lead the portion seeking more input on the best ways to do these things. I think that I want to add one more example to this list here, or maybe give you a particularity on the list. Expand remote access. One of our advisory committee had people from all over the state, rural, urban, different races, genders, law community, outside the legal community. And what we heard from the rural representatives was bad broadband access. You just, how can you expand remote access via a virtual platform in a huge county with a low population, but no access to Wi-Fi unless you go down the road a couple of miles and hold your cell phone in the air? So we didn't specify that, but I really want to make sure that this is read not as an urban, a list of stuff to help just our urban areas, but this would really help our rural areas as well. Next slide. I talked about the vast increase in convictions and our desire to address that going backwards as well as going forward. Next slide. Reduce reliance on revenue from court users to fund the courts. Obviously, you know about this. Obviously, this takes legislative change, and just as obviously as a judicial branch agency and a justice, there's certain things that I can do to lobby the judicial branch in terms of access to justice, but other things that we might not be as comfortable doing, but your organization might be. And I think the final slide is number 5. This is probably more in the judicial branch wheelhouse than yours, but if not, just tell us. So I'm telling you a lot of what you know. We were able to get a lot of data to back up the theories that we came in with, and we were able to get data that challenged some of our theories. It's not always women. Mass incarceration, for example, certainly affects men more than women. It's not always women suffering from sexual exploitation or trafficking. We were surprised at the number of young men, underreported numbers of young men, particularly members of the LGBTQ community who suffer from that. So we found surprises as well. Let me take a quick look at the chat before I turn it over to, oh, great. Okay, well, thanks for the info. This sounds like great stuff for us to partner on. I didn't know that. So much for the PowerPoint. Let's take it off the screen, and our goal as Donna leads is to look at each other so we can have more of a conversation. So Dr. Rogrodsky, somebody.
Thank you, Justice.
Oh, there you are.
Yes.
There you are. Dr. Rogrodsky.
Yes, I barely made it out of class and joined you all a few minutes later. So good morning, and thank you all for, again, I joined Justice Gordon MacLeod. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to not only highlight to you some of our findings and recommendations, but obviously coming with a broader desire to continue partnering. As Justice Gordon MacLeod pointed, many of you have already been engaged closely with us on this work, and we've relied on your knowledge and expertise. I am going to ask Kelly to just very quickly pull up the handout with some of the targeted recommendations that I believe was circulated to you yesterday, just so that you know what I'm referring to. And I think now we can probably take it down because I hope you have it in front of you, or at least you have access to it. So I think, Kelly, I would like to have the conversation with people seeing each other. We pull together some of the recommendations which we thought may be more directly already related to your work. As Justice Gordon MacLeod pointed, you could probably characterize our entire report as an access to justice report. And by no means the list that we shared is limiting in any way. So one of our goals today is to hear feedback from you on both some of the recommendations, but specifically where you think are strengths align and converge, and where we can partner, or where maybe the A2J board can, or the A2J community can take the lead on, because obviously this is a very extensive study. We highlighted some that require legislative work, something that, there are many partners in Washington that are working on it at different angles. Just a few days ago, and I see Judge Keenan is here as well, I was listening to the LFO consortium, the stakeholders, and there's already a lot of work. But some of the recommendations, not surprisingly, call for increasing more funding, right? Asking the legislator to increase more funding for representation in certain areas. I had an opportunity to look at I think Jim Bamberger already had to sign off. I had an opportunity to look at the minutes. I know that I believe in your last meeting, Jim reported on the representation, right? The right to counsel now in evictions or kind of in housing issues. And a lot of our recommendations identify that we clearly need to provide more support for those that are directly impacted in the system and have less ability to access on their own. So whether it was in family law issues, clearly, whether it's navigators or providing actual legal representation in some limited cases involving children. We definitely heard in other areas that the need to have access to both legal counsel or some form of professional help, as well as the fees, right? The access, the financial barriers. And I think Terry, my colleague who's literally across the hallway, right, was talking about the $5 user fee, right? So we're talking about enhancing access remotely, or using more technology to enhance access, something that I know you've been working on for years. Even a $5 fee can be a huge barrier. And it often impacts the same people, right? It impacts the parent, or impacts those that are formerly incarcerated and are now trying to access the system to get all sorts of things, right? Restitution, LFOs forgiven, or vacating for people who were convicted, for example, the area that I work with, commercial work, sex work. So the fees is a huge issue. But because the way our courts are structured and reliant heavily on those user fees, there's a tension there. So to the extent that this is something that A2J would like to partner or take the lead on, really expanding those access issues and maybe removing some of those barriers, I really would love to hear some of your feedback. There are other things in those lists, some that stemmed out of our incarceration chapter that Justice Gordon MacLeod already talked about, with recognizing maybe caregiving, not just for children, maybe elder caregiving as well, for as a mitigating factor, or expanding access to alternative sentencing options, primarily for those that are parenting or those that have other caregiving responsibilities. So rather than go one by one through that very long list of recommendations, I'm going to stop. And I just want to hear some suggestions on what maybe we should take, what you think you want to take on, other areas of what we need to maybe push on harder first. Is the legislator amenable for us asking more money? They just expanded funding in one area. Should we wait? Should we not wait? So I'm just going to open it up. I don't know, in this group, do you raise your hand virtually? Do people just start talking? How does it work?
Thank you, Justice Gordon MacLeod. And it's my personal pleasure to have my friend and colleague, Professor Rogrodsky here. And literally we are across the hall from each other. Just because we're in Zoom, I think raising hands will just be easier and I can just call on people.
Thank you, Terry. Appreciate it.
Questions, comments?
Or of course, I'm happy to expand further on any of the areas if I can provide any more information. One of our one of our goals, obviously, for this 1,000 plus report, but less than 100 executive summary, is that it provides also an evidence-based benchmark in the same way that the OCLA, right, the civil studies need, has really become somewhat of a benchmark. And especially if we are advocating for the legislator or for other policymakers in the executive branch to change policies, hopefully, even though we encountered data issues, there is enough evidence and data to support our assertions and recommendations. So I'm happy to expand on anything.
Sal.
Again, just great. I mean, this report is phenomenal, and thank you both for taking the time to share the information with us. So these are just kind of a couple of comments regarding the funding. What I would ask that the Gender and Justice Commission do is attend the EJC stakeholder sessions. Trust me, I mean, every year, kind of our goal is increase funding for civil legal aid. And the more shareholders we can get involved with that, and especially getting members. Every other year, we have a lobbying day. And it's one thing for organizations that try to increase funding. It's different when the legislators hear from their constituents themselves. We've made great gains, and trust me, I think we can keep on getting more funding to raise everybody's resources, the more cooperation we get. And the second thing I would do is, I love kind of the discrete items that I really think we can partner up with the commission. Such as, I don't know, taking a run at flexible hours, court hours. I mean, that's huge, right? Because not everybody can attend court during the 8:30 to 4:30 hours. On the fee waivers, you know, we've got our own kind of in-house expert with Dave Keenan on that, and work on discrete projects. I'm not going to go through just like you did with items, but I'm hoping the board, and I'm looking at our chair-elect, will maybe either appoint a committee to figure out what's the most effective way. I mean, we can't do everything, but where can we get the biggest bang for our bucks working cooperatively together? So again, thank you for coming, and these are just a couple of my ideas and suggestions.
Sal, bouncing off of that, Gender and Justice is also going to form an implementation committee, and we haven't figured out exactly what the structure of it'll be, but we wanted to have partners in the groups that are, we don't claim that we're doing everything. If it's a matter of us keeping tabs on what other groups are taking the lead on, we're happy to serve as just the repository on that. So you're a liaison to our group. It may be that we ask you or your designee to be on that implementation committee. Or I heard you talking to your president-elect about you guys forming some kind of implementation committee. Let's have overlap in that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Other folks with comments or questions? Esperanza.
Yeah, thank you very much. And Justice McLeod and Dr. I don't want to.
Dana, just Dana.
Dr. Dana.
Just Dana.
Thank you very much for the presentation and for this report. Was so impressed when I heard it the first time and equally impressed now. I can't help but think how many of us might be able to utilize the materials that you put together in this report to assist us in trying to address some of these issues in the work that we're already doing, and to support and ask for the kinds of funds that are needed to do this work. This is invaluable to you know, as a resource, as a tool to add when I think of, you know, the applications, grant applications that we're filling out and all that information. And the other thing is to me, the education, one of the goals that you had was around the education of the courts and around the issue of race and gender, and how I haven't read the report. I don't know how in-depth it goes into how you're going to do that, or the ideas or suggestions or what have you, but for sure incorporating the community, involving them in panels on race and gender as experts in those fields, to inform, educate, and inspire the courts, and working to identify who are those people around the state that who inform the organizations they work with, who already are doing this work. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. They're out there. And if you're looking at putting together some kind of education model that we don't want to miss the opportunity to make sure that we have those experts from the community that have that lived experience, all the people that you mentioned in your report. So that's another thing. So I don't know if you, I'm just impressed. It's going to take me a while to read through the whole thing. It's a big report.
It's 1,000 pages.
Yeah.
Justice Gordon MacLeod, you have your hand up.
You know, I appreciate the credit and the recognition of the concrete steps we've proposed, but just between us, there's a lot of stuff we don't know how to go about doing that you could help us with too. For example, childcare. We're unanimous in knowing that absence of childcare keeps women in poverty from accessing court. How do you address that? Well, you know, when we debated recommendations, you know, views ranged from universal, free, quality childcare for all to vouchers for existing childcare to, you know, encourage private sector to blah, 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 blah. So we don't know the answer to really what the next step is, except that we really need it. Maybe your group can help find the answer to that or to what the next step is for us to take. But we sound pretty definite, but there's a lot we don't know in terms of next steps.
Dana, you're next.
Just to very, very briefly add, because I see that there are more, I really want to get more questions. We definitely, so Esperanza, I couldn't agree with you more. We tried as we were collecting data to also involve as many stakeholders, people from the community, those with lived experiences. Obviously, several of you have already been, right? Whether it's the Minority and Justice Symposium or the LFL Consortium, listening to the people who are actually experiencing all of this is a key source of evidence for us. So we tried, but we know that as we continue with the work, it's important to keep having all the voices around the table. And not all the voices are unified, as Justice Gordon MacLeod said. We've definitely debated some issues. We've had that come up in several chapters. I think around the access issues, around the use of technology, there are probably things that we think, oh, that's working great. Let's make everybody go on Zoom, or let's make, right? But if you happen to be in an unsafe environment, or if you simply don't have access to the internet or things like that, we need to be aware of some other barriers that still remain hidden to us. So I think as we continue to try and implement, probably some things will get tweaked and modified. So that's where we're looking for feedback and to continue working with in the field knowledge, evidence-based from the field. So I just wanted to add that. Thank you.
Thank you. Chach.
Thank you so much for your report. And I'm not on the Access to Justice Board. I am with LCYC, which serves young people, and I'm also part of DISCO. So I have, I guess, a couple of remarks. I think it's great, and I will full on explain. I have not read the report. I have barely skimmed just the summary. So I'm not even there. But a couple of questions I had on the improving the data collection, which we know is a mess. One thing I'm wondering if there's a way to make it, as you go about this, maybe making it like a gold standard than other people to comply with, because if you can't compare apples to apples, it makes it very hard. And I know when we compare things, a lot of times we're looking at the census, which I have my own issues with. And so trying to come up with one type of data collection that everybody uses would be phenomenal. It would be like my dream. But that's one thing I wanted to comment on. The other thing is, I'm wondering if you all had a chance to look at, when you're talking about how gender and race affects justice, did you at all look at, and because I didn't read the report, maybe you did, how the people that are in the justice system and deliver the services are also impacted by gender and race, because we know that many people of color cannot afford to do this work. And we know that because of childcare and other things, many women cannot afford to do certain work. And I'm wondering, because that has a trickle down effect to the clients, right? If they don't see people that are like them or that might be in the justice system, it's harder to trust that the system may work. And I'm wondering if you had all had a chance to look at that, because to me, that's one of our biggest barriers. People of color can't afford to do legal aid. They just can't. The few that are there either have someone else helping them or are barely living on the edge. And it's something that I think we need to think of as a whole and as a general, and how it impacts everything.
So I will just briefly answer that in our chapter 4, I think, we specifically look at the legal community and exactly identify a lot of those barriers that continue to exist, the pay inequities, the barriers to accessing decision-making positions or leadership positions. Race and ethnicity play a key role. Gender, LGBTQ plus individuals are also excluded in many respects. So we have looked at the legal community. This was also something that the 1989 report looked at. I don't know that we, so yes, unfortunately there is data there. It's not, there's improvement, and definitely Washington is obviously in some respects at the forefront of, I mean, just look at our Supreme Court, right? But there's still inroads that we need to make. So it's there. So hopefully when you have an opportunity maybe to look at it, I would love to hear more. This is something that obviously the WSBA and others, but I agree the who serves in those positions that are able to help the system users is also a key issue.
Yes, absolutely. And I'll just add to Chacha's first point about data collection, and this is something I've already shared with Justice Gordon MacLeod, is that this is a big issue for the JISC, the Judicial Information Systems Committee, that there aren't clear, or they've tried to institute clear reporting standards. And for instance, in Washington right now, because certain counties don't cooperate, you cannot tell if divorces went up as a result of the pandemic because there's insufficient data. I mean, something as simple as that in the area where I work. Claudia, I see your hand is raised.
And I'm not hearing anything, so she might not
No.
know she's on mute.
Claudia, you're on mute.
Yes, am I unmuted now?
Yeah, yes, you are.
Okay. Yes, wonderful report and wonderful recommendations. I put in the chat some resources that go to different areas of the report. I will put another one. I was yesterday at a self-represented community meeting where they were discussing the case of Florida. I don't know if any of you were on that. Florida wanted to go and do more stuff online and remote. They basically wanted to redo all the rules. And they appointed a committee of 5 judges, and those judges went on their own without any empirical data. And they came up with recommendations where they were going to change a lot of the due process, like service and all kinds of other things, to like email notifications and being valid in civil and criminal, and allowing default if somebody didn't reply to the email, all kinds of things. Something that we would never do in Washington, but it is a great cautionary tale. And as and one of the mistakes they made is that they never invited anyone else into their little group of 5, not even legal aid organizations, not anyone working in shelters, not anybody working with the families of people coming out of prison. It was an extreme example of groupthink. So the SRLN, the NLADA got involved, and other national groups got involved, and they provided really good written comment. I'm gonna share that because the comment really raises some of the issues, particularly as you're looking into things like email, phishing, the stuff that's been happening with Tyler and with Pacer right now, right? Where you know there are serious concerns about the safety of the, this is in federal court, but the litigants' data and records, and how people now get phished, and some people will never click on an attachment if it looked like it was coming from a court, because how do you know it's legit, right? So the report gets into depth, and I think that whatever happens, at least with the move more stuff remote and online, there's a lot of, we are very lucky that we have our standards, right? The principles on access to justice and technology. And so we have that, so that's a great place to work from. And I think also, you know, these developments in Florida, the write-up is really good because it's another checklist of things to think through, because they did all the research. And the last thing is that I did post the tool that they created to analyze broadband capacity in Florida. They really did format it for Florida, but all the national data is there. So if anybody wants to work with them to like doing it for Washington or whatever, they can do that. And it's very granular. You can get really by city and really get into it to see the coverage of broadband or other types of methods to really understand what groups it's impacting. And in Florida, they focus on Latino, Black, and elderly. And you know, they found that about 3 million people don't have access in the state of Florida. I live in Eastern Washington. My network is always down after the school system ends because all the teachers are entering stuff. I would love to see how that looks in our state before we make assumptions about who can connect and not. The other thing is, I'm not in the legal aid community, but I work across the country with like multiple legal aid providers. And what I notice is that if this is going to be led, it has to have incredible support from the courts and the court system, because the legal aid groups seem to be extremely overwhelmed. Right now, in a lot of places, it's all about the housing courts opening and how that's going to happen, intense negotiations on that, adapting to legislative changes in a lot of places. And then, you know, overwhelming consumer collections and probate for smaller states, unfortunately, in some areas because of death, and all kinds of things. So if leadership is going to come from this or some structure, I think legal aid definitely has to be at the table, but don't put, I don't, you know, I'm not in legal services practice. I'm in technology, but you know, make sure that you give it to groups that are not totally overwhelmed with what we're dealing with at the local level. Just something to think about of where the capacity is. And at the end, where is the onus of responsibility, right? If it's about remote access to meaningful court hearings, is that legal aid or is that the courts, right? Who has the power to make it happen and who's gonna be running the systems? And I put there a note that I think disability and language spoken at home should be taken into consideration too.
Thank you, Claudia, very much. And we can all insert our own feelings about Florida. And we'll just keep them to ourselves. I do want to say that, and I don't know the details of this, but Representative Drew Hansen had a bill last year to expand broadband access throughout the state, and it did get passed and funded. So obviously implementation will take a little while, but there was some, you know, some movement on expanding broadband to cover uncovered areas. Other comments for Justice Gordon MacLeod and Professor Rogradsky? All right, well, thank you very much. And thank you also, Kelly, I don't want to leave you out, for being here and joining us today and presenting on your monumental report.
Oh, thank you for everything you're doing.
And I'm sure this is to be continued. Thank you all, everybody, for your time. I appreciate it.
this is definitely to be continued. Absolutely. All right. There is no Equal Justice Coalition update. And Natalia, you are the only one from the funding reports who is online. So.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. Yes, I can do a quick update for the Campaign for Equal Justice. We had a wonderful event last night, Spokane Beer and Justice, and Francis Adewale was our speaker, and he was wonderful. Of course, he's an incredible speaker. We had over 50 people sign on and stay on for the hour with us for that Spokane event, and raised a record amount. We raised over 15K for legal aid last night. Woohoo! So that was exciting. It's the most we've ever raised on the Spokane event. So it was excellent, great crowd. We've got Olympia Beer and Justice happening in 2 weeks with AG Ferguson as our speaker and Justice Deborah Stevens. So that'll be lovely as well. The law firm campaign is in full effect. We've raised more than half of our goal. Our goal is 700,000 this year. We're just approaching 400K right now. So thank you to everyone who helps with your private firm donations. And then our associates campaign, which is super fun, is the last 2 weeks of October every year. And we're in our third year this year. We have 12 firms statewide. McKinley Irvin, Dorsey, and Fou Cochran, Vertitas Amela joined us this year. And so we are very excited. There's about 400, a little over 400 associates in total between those 12 firms that'll be competing against each other for a couple of fun awards. And then their goal is to raise $100,000. So they're also, doing a lot for civil legal aid. So that's exciting. And that kicks off October 18. And then we're doing a Southwest Washington event this year. So combining with the virtual capacity, we're going to be combining Clark, Cowlitz, and Wahkiakum programs. So that'll be really fun. We've never had an event with Cowlitz, Wahkiakum legal aid. So excited to bring them in and engage that area of the state. And then let's see, I think, one more note for this group. I hear that the justice glasses are really popular. Thank you, Lindy, for showing that off. And if anyone wants one, you can make a donation of any amount today, and I'll add you to the list to receive one of those in the mail. So thank you all for your support. You all do great work. I want to echo the good work too of the gender and justice equity and justice group that presented earlier, and Justice McLeod. That was really wonderful information. And yes, always ask for more funding. Always. They can always say no, but we got to keep asking because we're underfunded. So.
And Natalia, if people want to make a donation today for those incredible glasses, where do they donate?
Excellent question. I will put a link in the chat for you all. But you can always go to legalfoundation.org. I'll do that right now. Thank you all. Thanks for your work.
Super. There was I got a note. Cesar cannot join us. He has no update on federal money other than to say, I believe the continuing resolution that we all know about that's funding our government only goes till December 15th. And they are obviously renegotiating at this time. We have no reports from our other funders. So the last item is other updates and announcements. I'm going to return to something that Sal said, which is that, yes, I am the chair-elect for the ATJ board. And so you will be seeing more of me. I'm very excited. I believe, though please someone correct me if I'm wrong, I believe I will be the first openly queer Access to Justice Board chair. Please correct me if I'm wrong. But I'm very excited about that. Yes. So other announcements that people want to make or updates? Well, seeing none, then we will give you back some time in your day. And thank you all for joining us. And have an excellent weekend.